On December 12, 1910, Dorothy Arnold, an aspiring writer and daughter of a wealthy New York City businessman, left home to go shopping for a dress to wear to her younger sister's debutante party. While running some errands on Fifth Avenue, she bumped into a friend, and the two women chatted briefly. Dorothy mentioned that she planned to walk through Central Park before returning home to 79th Street. The women said their goodbyes and began to part ways. But something made the friend turn and look back in Dorothy's direction. Dorothy caught her friend's gaze, and the two women waved goodbye one last time. Dorothy Arnold has never been seen since. Hello, Spookaroos, and welcome to Spooky Times with Eric D. I am your Eric D. So I'm trying something a little different with this episode, as you might have noticed. Mixing it up a little bit, giving you what they call a cold opening in the biz. Instead of doing the intro first, we tease the story a little bit. Yes, this is the story of Dorothy Arnold, and I'll tell you folks, I've talked about it before, but sometimes you get stuck for an idea, especially after more than 200 episodes, and you try to think, what haven't I talked about before? And what is something that, the people haven't heard so often that they're going to be like, oh, this story again? So I just so happened to have gone to Savers recently, and I found one of those Time Life books. Not one of the, more common ones. It's like this, of course, I don't have it in front of me now. Would have been good, since I'm about to do a show that I was inspired by this book, but I don't have it in front of me. But it wasn't like Mysteries of the Unknown or one of those. It was some other one. But anyway, the title of this particular volume in this Time Life series was Vanishings. And I said, okay, maybe I can find a good vanishing story to tell. And I found one that I thought was pretty interesting, and I didn't think I'd heard before. And I said, okay, this is good. And then, of course, doing my research, I discovered that BuzzFeed Unsolved actually covered this one. So I said, well, I already did most of my notes about it, so I'm still going to do it, but it's maybe not as obscure as I thought or hoped it might have been. This is the story of Dorothy Arnold and her strange disappearance, so we're going to talk about that. But before we do, I do want to ask everyone to check out the website, spookyas.com, where you can find links to our social media. We are at Spooky Times on Instagram. That's the brand new Instagram. If you're still following the old Instagram, come on. Get with the times, the spooky times, at Spooky Times with Eric D. That's the Instagram. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Spooky Times with Eric D. It works out nicely that way. You can also join our secret closed group, the Spookaroos, there. And let's see, what else? Anything else to tell you guys about? Oh, the Patreon, of course. Patreon, there's exclusive videos and more exclusive goodies as we go along. It is a small but mighty crew over on the Patreon, and if you enjoy the show and if you support the work that I do, you can join for as little as, I think, $3 a month is the lowest tier. I think it's $3, $5, and $10. So whatever you're willing to give, whatever you think the show is worth to you every month, I would highly appreciate that, and it helps keep things going. I'm still using the same equipment that I was using on day one to record most of these episodes, and it's all going well for now, but some of this equipment's getting a little long in the tooth. So anything that I get from the Patreon goes to either this or other creative endeavors, because of course this is a Witchfinder production. So it could help the Witchfinder, it could help this here, but it's all going to be stuff that's made available to the public in one way or another. It's not just for my own personal gain, and I hope you will consider becoming a true blue spookaroo over on Patreon. And I also apologize if I sound a little funny today. I probably shouldn't even admit this, but I think this goes in that weird slice of life section where maybe something similar has happened to you, or at least something as weird, but this is a weird thing that happened. I think I strained a muscle in my neck or popped something out of place by drinking soda. I think I had my head turned wrong. I felt a little movement, an unusual movement in my throat, and it's been a little bit sore since last night. So I'm gonna persevere. I'm gonna push through it. My soda injury to bring you this episode, and let's talk about the strange disappearance of Dorothy Arnold. Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold was born in New York City, the second of 4 children of perfume importer Francis Arnold and his wife, Mary. The Arnold family was well established in New York City. Francis Arnold was a Harvard University graduate who ran his own company bearing his name. His sister, Harriet Maria Arnold, was married to Supreme Court Justice Rufus W. Peckham. Rufus is a good name. Their family lineage in America stretched all the way back to the Mayflower. Due to their social standing, the family was listed in the Social Register, and this is a semi-annual publication that indexes the members of American high society. It's like a book, and if you're fancy enough, you get into it, and apparently this thing still exists. I can assure you that the Dwinells family is not now, nor has it ever been, in danger of being on the Social Register. Dorothy Arnold was educated at the Valton School for Girls in New York City and then attended Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania, where she majored in literature and language until she graduated in 1905. After graduation, Dorothy returned to the family home at 108 East 79th Street with dreams of becoming a writer. In the spring of 1910, she submitted a short story to McClure's magazine, but it was rejected. Arnold's family and friends never took her dreams of being a writer seriously. She was, after all, a socialite and an heiress. They expected that she would find a suitable husband and live out the rest of her days as a loving wife and mother to another wealthy businessman like her father. Because of this, when the rejection letter came from McClure's, her family teased her about it. To avoid such ribbing in the future, Dorothy rented a post office box to receive any further correspondence from magazines or publishing houses. In October of 1910, Dorothy asked her father if she could take an apartment in Greenwich Village in order to be able to better focus on her writing. Francis Arnold dismissed this idea, saying, "A good writer can write anywhere." After working up her nerve, Dorothy submitted a second story to McClure's in November of 1910, this one entitled The Poinsettia and the Flame. Unfortunately for Dorothy, this story was also rejected. According to Dorothy's friends, the second rejection letter left her dejected and embarrassed. On the morning of December 12th, 1910, Dorothy informed her mother that she intended to go shopping for a dress to wear to her younger sister's upcoming debutante party. If you don't know, a debutante party is like when a wealthy family usually, they host like a party for a girl who is coming of dating age. And it's like their debut party or their debutante party, they call it. So this was like a big deal. Kind of like a quinceañera, I guess. Mary offered to go with her daughter, but Dorothy declined, saying she would call her if she found a suitable dress so that she could come pay for it. She left the family home around 11 a.m. According to the Arnold family, Dorothy had approximately $25 to $30 cash in her possession, which would be about $700 to $850 in today's money. She walked from her home on 79th Street to the Park and Tilford store on the corner of 5th Avenue and 59th Street. Dorothy charged a half-pound box of chocolates to her account at approximately 12 p.m., placed it in her muff, and then continued to walk another 22 blocks, which is about a mile and a half, to Brentano's bookstore on 27th Street and 5th Avenue. While at Brentano's, Dorothy purchased Engaged Girl Sketches, a book of humorous essays by Emily Calvin Blake. The clerks who waited on Dorothy in both stores later said that she was courteous and did not exhibit any unusual behavior. Outside the bookstore, Dorothy ran into a friend named Gladys King. King recalled that the two spoke briefly about the upcoming debutante party and that Dorothy seemed to be in good spirits. King then excused herself, explaining that she had to meet her mother for lunch at the Waldorf Astoria. She recalled that Arnold told her that she was going to walk home through Central Park. King last saw Dorothy shortly before 2 p.m., when she turned to wave goodbye for a second time. By early evening, Dorothy had failed to return home for dinner. As she had never missed a meal without informing her family before, the Arnolds became worried. They began calling Dorothy's friends, but no one had seen her. Shortly after midnight on December 13th, Elise Henry, one of Dorothy's concerned friends, called the Arnolds to see if Dorothy had returned home yet. Curiously, Elise later reported that Mary Arnold answered the phone and told her that Dorothy had indeed returned home. When Elise asked to speak to Dorothy, Mary hesitated and told Elise that Dorothy had gone to bed with a headache. Now, I say that's strange because, according to the Arnold's family official story, they never saw Dorothy again after she left home that morning. So we don't know, did Elise get her times confused? Maybe she was thinking of a different day when she called and asked to speak to Dorothy, or maybe she's making up the story whole cloth, or maybe the Arnolds were up to something shady. Daughters disappearing from aristocratic families was not unheard of, but it could be damaging to the family standing in high society. Just the year before, Adele Boa, a 13-year-old daughter of a prominent Boa family of New York, disappeared from Central Park. The girl was reported missing right away, and a police investigation began. The story of the missing girl was reported in all the papers. When it was discovered that the girl had in fact run away to Boston, the newspapers reported it as a scandal, and it shamed the Boa family. Fearing that their daughter's disappearance would draw similar unwanted media attention, the Arnold family did not report Dorothy's appearance to the police right away. Instead, the Arnold family quietly contacted John S. Keith, a family friend and a lawyer, the morning after Dorothy's disappearance. Keith arrived at the family home and searched Dorothy's bedroom. He discovered that, except for the outfit she was wearing the day she disappeared, all of Dorothy's clothes and other personal belongings were in her room. Keith also found personal letters with foreign postmarks on her desk, 2 folders for transatlantic ocean liners on the desk, and burnt papers in the fireplace. The burnt papers were presumed to be the rejected manuscripts Arnold had submitted to McClure's magazine. Over the following weeks, Keith visited jails, hospitals, and morgues in New York City, Philadelphia, and Boston, but he did not find any sign of Dorothy. After Keith's search proved fruitless, he suggested that the Arnold family hire a Pinkerton detective to investigate. The Pinkerton agency, I won't go into the whole history here, although it is very interesting, is a private security and detective agency that has been in existence since the mid-19th century, and they provided security detail for Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. So they are well known and well respected at the time of Dorothy's disappearance, and they're going to come in and do some work for the Arnold family. Pinkerton investigators searched area hospitals and the places that Dorothy was known to frequent, but found no trace of her. They also questioned Dorothy's friends and former college classmates, but no one had seen her. As Keith had found literature for transatlantic ocean liners in Arnold's room the day after she disappeared, Pinkerton investigators theorized that Dorothy might have eloped with a man to Europe. The agents searched marriage records, but none was found bearing Dorothy Arnold's name. Agents were then dispatched overseas to search the ocean liners arriving from New York. While several women matching Dorothy's physical description were found, Dorothy herself was not. After Keith and the Pinkerton detectives could not find Dorothy, they persuaded Francis Arnold to finally contact the New York Police Department. The police advised him to hold a press conference in order to get as much publicity as possible. Francis was not thrilled with this suggestion, but he eventually agreed. On January 25, 1911, reporters gathered at Francis's New York City office where he informed them of his daughter's disappearance and offered a $1,000 reward. Now, $1,000 for your daughter doesn't sound like too much today, but it was about $28,000 back in the day, so a little more substantial. This would be given to anyone with information leading to Dorothy's whereabouts. During the press conference, reporters asked Francis if it were possible that his daughter was still alive and had simply run away with a man, as it was known he did not allow his daughters to date. Francis vehemently denied this, stating, "I would have been glad to see her associate with more young men than she did, especially some young men of brains and position, one whose profession or business would keep him occupied. I do not approve of young men who have nothing to do." In other words, He don't want no scrubs. Reporters soon discovered that Francis's comment was directed at George Garrison Jr., a man Dorothy had met while at college and with whom she was romantically involved. Garrison, who preferred to be called Junior, was a 42-year-old engineer who came from a wealthy Pennsylvania family with whom he still lived at the Kenmar Hotel in Pittsburgh. Now, there are some red flags right away. First of all, this guy's like almost twice her age. And he still lives with his parents, which, that is not the end of the world, maybe especially back in these times, but it does seem a little old for a man of means, someone who's supposed to be like out in society. Also, he still likes to be called Junior. When you're 42, I don't know, that seems like maybe within the family you're called Junior, but outside the family you'd want to establish your own identity, wouldn't you? So, I don't know, maybe I'm old-timey. Maybe I agree with Mr. Arnold on this particular choice of man. Seems kind of like a do-nothing, like a no-good do-nothing. Reporters soon uncovered more family secrets. They discovered that in September of 1910, Dorothy had lied to her parents and told them that she was going to visit a friend from college in Boston. Instead, she spent a week in a hotel with Garrison. Arnold's parents found out about the rendezvous after Dorothy had pawned $500 worth of jewels to finance their week-long hotel stay. After returning home, Arnold's parents forbade her to continue her relationship with Garrison because they found him unsuitable, both professionally and morally. Despite their disapproval, Arnold continued to correspond with Garrison. The two had reportedly seen each other for the final time in early November, shortly before Garrison left on a European vacation with his parents. Okay, Dorothy. Girl. Real talk. He's 42 years old and he's making you pay for your little hotel trips by pawning your jewels? You can't figure out that this is not a good relationship? You need Dad to come in and chime and tell you this? Things must have been rough at home. But a 42-year-old man asking a 20-something girl, pawn your jewelry so we can shack up in a hotel for a week? Nah, dog. Nah. After Dorothy's disappearance, Garrison was found vacationing with his parents in Florence, Italy. The Arnold family sent him a telegram on December 16th asking for information about Dorothy's disappearance. In a return telegram, Grissom denied having any knowledge of her whereabouts and claimed to know nothing of her disappearance. In early January of 1911, Dorothy's mother Mary and her brother John traveled to Italy by ship to personally interrogate Grissom. They met him at his room at the Anglo-American Hotel on January 16th. Grissom stuck to his story and said that he knew nothing of Dorothy's disappearance. During the visit, Mary and John demanded that Grissom give them all the letters that Dorothy had sent him. John later claimed that the letters contained nothing of importance and said that he later destroyed them. Upon his return to the United States in February of 1911, Garrison told the press that he intended to marry Dorothy when she was found, on the condition that her mother approve of the marriage. Mary Arnold immediately told reporters she would never approve of the marriage. That same month, the San Francisco Chronicle reported that hotel clerks at the hotel where Grissom was staying had seen a veiled woman that they believed to be Dorothy. According to the staff, Grissom and the veiled woman had a, quote, earnest talk that they could not hear, and the woman disappeared, quote, greatly agitated. In the months following Dorothy's disappearance, Grissom spent thousands of dollars for ads in major newspapers asking her to come home. In the days following the public announcement of Arnold's disappearance, police distributed circulars with her pictures, a physical description, and information about the reward throughout the United States, Canada, and Mexico. The New York Times continued to cover the story on a near-daily basis. The publicity led investigators to receive calls from people across the United States who claimed to have seen Dorothy. These calls were investigated, but all proved to be false or unsubstantiated. The Arnold family also received 2 ransom notes from alleged kidnappers who demanded upwards of $5,000 for Dorothy's return. The kidnapping claims also proved to be a hoax. By the end of January 1911, the New York City Police Department said they still believed that Arnold was alive and would return on her own accord. Arnold's family, however, had come to believe that she was dead. I suppose an abducted, murdered daughter was more acceptable than a runaway in their social circle. It was around this time that Francis Arnold told the press that he believed from the start that his daughter had been attacked and killed while walking home through Central Park, and that her body had been thrown into the Central Park Reservoir. He claimed there were 2 clues which supported his hypothesis, but he never revealed what those clues were to the public. Police investigators dismissed Francis Arnold's theory because in the days leading up to Arnold's disappearance, the temperature in New York City had dropped to just 21 degrees Fahrenheit, and the reservoir had frozen over solid. The police searched Central Park anyway, but found no trace of Dorothy Arnold. When the reservoir thawed that spring, police searched the water, but found no body. In early February 1911, Francis Arnold received a postcard signed Dorothy, bearing a New York City postmark that read, "I am safe." While the writing matched his daughter's, Francis believed that someone had copied Dorothy's handwriting from samples that were featured in the newspapers, and that the postcard was nothing more than a cruel joke. Around the same time, a jeweler in San Francisco, California, claimed that a woman he recognized as Dorothy had had him engrave a diamond ring for her on January 7th with the inscription, "To AJA from ERB, December 10, 1910. Shortly after this, the NYPD announced that they had decided to stop investigating Dorothy Arnold's disappearance. Deputy Police Commissioner William J. Flynn stated, "The girl's been missing for 75 days now, and in all that time, not a single clue has been found that was worth the name. We have no evidence that a crime has been committed, and the case is now one of a missing person and nothing more." Police continued to investigate reported sightings, but none led to Dorothy. Numerous theories and rumors regarding Dorothy's disappearance continued to circulate. One theory was that Dorothy had slipped on an icy sidewalk, struck her head, and was in a hospital with total amnesia. This theory does not really pan out, though, because there were no women matching her description in the area hospitals who had sustained a head injury. Other theories arose that Dorothy had been drugged and abducted, but that theory was considered unlikely as she was last seen on a busy street corner on a sunny afternoon. George Garrison Jr. had his own theory. He theorized that she had committed suicide because she was despondent over her failed writing career. After her second short story was rejected, Dorothy wrote a letter to Garrison expressing her disappointment over her lack of progress as a writer and alluded to suicide, stating, "Well, the short story, has come back. McClure's has turned me down. Failure stares me in the face. All I can see ahead is the long road with no turning. Mother will always think an accident has happened." Some of Dorothy's family members and friends also stated that they believed that she had killed herself, but felt that she committed suicide not because of her writing career, but because her relationship with Garrison was faltering. The newspaper, the New York World, also supported this reasoning after they discovered that Garrison's cousin, Andrew Garrison, had jumped to his death from an ocean liner after he had been forbidden to marry an English nanny. Perhaps the most popular rumor at the time was that Dorothy had become pregnant, sought an abortion, and had died during or after the botched procedure, and had been secretly buried or cremated. This rumor gained some credibility when, in April of 1916, an illegal abortion clinic operating out of a basement home in Bellevue, Pennsylvania, was raided by police. The clinic was run by Dr. C.C. Meredith, and the home became notoriously known as the House of Mystery, after numerous women from the area went missing after visiting the clinic. One of the doctors who worked at the clinic, Dr. H.E. Lutz, testified to the New York County District Attorney that Dr. Meredith had told him that Dorothy Arnold had died there after experiencing complications from an abortion. Dr. Lutz claimed that, like many of the women who had undergone abortions at the clinic, Dorothy died, and her body was burned in the furnace. While the district attorney stated that he believed that Dorothy had died at the clinic, Francis Arnold said he thought the story was, quote, "ridiculous and absolutely untrue," end quote. The Arnold family lawyer, John S. Keith, later told the media that 2 months after Dorothy Arnold disappeared, he got a tip from an attorney in Pittsburgh that she was in a local sanatorium or madhouse. Keith claimed that he and 2 detectives traveled to Pittsburgh, but discovered that the woman was not Dorothy Arnold. More than 5 years after Dorothy's disappearance, in April 1916, a convicted felon named Edward Glenn Norris claimed that he was paid $250 to bury the body of a young woman in December of 1910. Glenn Norris claimed that an acquaintance known only as Little Louie hired him to drive a woman from a home in New Rochelle to West Point, New York. At the home in New Rochelle, Glenn Norris said that he and Little Louie were met by 2 men, one of whom was called Doc, and another who Glenn Norris described as wealthy and well-dressed, and looking rather like George Grissom, Jr. Glenn Norris and Little Louie then loaded the unconscious woman into the car and drove her to a house in Weehawken, New Jersey. During the drive, Glenn Norris said that Little Louie told him that the woman was Dorothy Arnold. The next day, Little Louie contacted Glenn Norris to, quote, finish the job. Upon returning to Weehawken, Doc informed the men that the woman had died at the home during an operation. Glenn Norris said that he and Little Louie then drove the woman's body back to the home in New Rochelle, wrapped the body in a sheet, and buried it in the cellar. Glenn Norris initially told this story to the prison warden, who then reported it to authorities. However, upon subsequent interviews with law enforcement, Glenn Norris acted confused and claimed he knew nothing about Dorothy Arnold's whereabouts. Police followed up Glenn Norris's initial claims and excavated the cellars of several homes in the area, but did not locate any human remains. Dorothy's father vehemently denied Glenn Norris's claims, telling reporters, "So far it appears on the face of the man's story he is talking utter nonsense." Years after Arnold disappeared, numerous alleged sightings from all over the U.S. were still being reported. Police continued to investigate the reports, but none panned out. The Arnold family also continued to receive letters from women claiming to be Dorothy Arnold. These were also investigated, but also led to nothing. In 1917, a man named John Galvin was riding the New York City subway when he spotted a woman he was certain was Dorothy Arnold. He quickly grabbed the woman and shouted, "I know you! Dorothy Arnold! I've got you at last!" The startled woman said her name was Mrs. Smith and begged strangers to help her escape Galvin's grip. Galvin told onlookers that he was a detective from Scotland Yard and he was taking this woman to the proper authorities. Not knowing who to believe, the onlookers allowed Galvin to take his prisoner. He dragged her into the police station and, after a quick examination of the two, police released Mrs. Smith and sent Galvin to a mental hospital. It turns out he was not actually a detective. The case gained attention again on April 8, 1921, when, during a lecture in New York, Captain John H. Ayers of the Bureau of Missing Persons claimed that Dorothy Arnold's fate had been known to the Bureau and her family for some time. Ayers refused to elaborate and would not say if Dorothy was dead or alive. The following day, Ayers claimed that he was misquoted and denied that he knew Dorothy's fate. In the weeks following his daughter's disappearance, Francis Arnold spent approximately $250,000 trying to find his daughter. He continued to maintain that he believed Dorothy had been kidnapped and murdered on the day she disappeared or shortly thereafter. Francis died on April 6, 1922. In his will, he intentionally made no provisions for Dorothy, stating that he was, quote, satisfied that she is not alive, end quote. According to Keith, the family lawyer, Dorothy's mother Mary did not share her husband's opinion that their daughter had been kidnapped and murdered and remained hopeful that she was still alive. Mary died on December 29, 1928. Shortly after her death, Keith publicly stated that he believed that Arnold had committed suicide because of her failed writing career. In an obituary for Mary Arnold, the United Press Association referenced the hunt for Dorothy Arnold as, quote, the really great search of the age, and one that did much to develop modern newspaper police coverage. And thus ends the story of Dorothy Arnold. That's a strange one because there are a lot of little tidbits that you hear about in that story that kind of come to nothing. And you just kind of are left to wonder, well, what does that mean? Does it mean anything? Is this person remembering something that actually happened? Or maybe they're getting their memories confused? Or what was this little item? And we don't really know. And so we just have to speculate. So if you want to know my speculation, I would guess okay, so she said she was going shopping for a dress, but we have no reports that she showed up at a dress shop. So that leads me to believe that the whole shopping for a dress thing was an excuse to get out of the house. And then when she was out of the house, what does she do? Well, we know for a fact that she goes and buys chocolates and a book. So maybe she was thinking about suicide and just decided to get these last little items as a little celebration for herself of like, okay, one last hurrah. I'm going to have some chocolate and read a book in Central Park, and then I'm going to off myself. I don't think that's probably what happened, though. I think, again, pure speculation on my part, but I like the idea that she left on an ocean liner to go to Europe to meet with this no-good Grissom, and that she bought the chocolates and the book to tide her over on this trip, perhaps, although, of course, it would take, several days, and that she was the veiled woman that these hotel workers claim to have seen Grissom talking to, and that she was despondent over her writing career, but also possibly because things weren't progressing the way she hoped with Grissom, and then she killed herself. So I think that either way, ultimately, she killed herself, and I think that Grissom might know more about it than he let on, but I don't think that he was directly involved in anything underhanded in that sense. Although, as I pointed out, I do find him a shady character, and I tend not to... let's just say I look at him suspiciously in other ways, though I don't think he is a murderer, and I don't think that the whole abortion thing has much credence to it. But who knows? That's just my speculation. What are your thoughts? Let me know on the Facebook group, or of course you can always email me, spookyasshit@gmail.com. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, check out our Instagram at Spooky Times with Eric D on Instagram. And don't forget Patreon. I've mentioned the Patreon earlier. I forgot to tell you where to find it. Patreon.com/Witchfinder, because, of course, Spooky Times with Eric D is a Witchfinder production. So you donate there. It gives to all the work that I do, as I mentioned earlier, to entertain you people, whether it's on the streets of Salem as the Witchfinder General, or on YouTube as the Witchfinder, or as Spooky Times, or just here on this little old podcast that I've been doing since 2016, I believe, 2016, and just having a good time with all you spookaroos. Whatever you could give, I would greatly appreciate it. And another thing that I would greatly appreciate is if you could share the show with a friend, and of course, leave kindly worded 5-star reviews on Apple Podcast or wherever you happen to be listening from. It means a lot to me. Sometimes I wonder, I see the download numbers and everything, so I know people are listening, but you don't always get the feedback, and you just wonder, is anyone really listening? So it's always nice to know that you folks are out there, you spookaroos are out there, you support what I do, and those are some ways that you can show it. So I hope that you will, and I hope that you are all staying safe and avoiding this terrible, terrible thing that is going around which shall not be named. And until next time, don't be afraid.
Spooky Times is a Witchfinder production.